I should have known better. At 71 years old, a man is supposed to have learned enough about the world to protect himself from the worst of it. I had built 3 businesses from scratch in California over the course of 40 years. I had survived a divorce that dragged on for 18 months and took nearly half of everything I had accumulated. I had watched employees steal from petty cash, watched business partners misrepresent numbers during acquisition talks, watched clients disappear the moment a contract became inconvenient. I had navigated all of it. I had come out the other side of all of it, with my finances intact and my judgment, I believed, sharpened by experience. I thought I was finished being surprised by people. I thought I had seen every angle a dishonest person could work. And then I moved to the Philippines, and I hired a woman named Candace Navaro, and over the course of 2 years, she quietly and methodically stole $520,000 from a business I had built with my own money and my own hands. And the part of that sentence that still wakes me up at 3 a.m, the part I cannot stop turning over no matter how much time passes, is not the $520,000. It is the word quietly. She did it quietly. She did it while sitting across desks from me. She did it while we shared lunches and talked about her family and her future. She did it while I sat in my apartment in Makati reading the weekly reports she sent me and telling myself that everything was running exactly as it should be. That is the part I cannot fully make peace with. The money is gone, and that is a permanent fact. But the trust is the wound that hasn't healed cleanly. I moved to Manila in early 2019. I was 69 years old, retired for 14 months, and tired of California, in a way that was hard to explain to people who had never spent 40 years watching a city slowly price out everything that made it worth living in. The apartment I had rented in Sacramento after my divorce cost me twice what I had paid for a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house in the same city 20 years earlier. The traffic had become something I experienced physically, in my shoulders and my jaw. The pace of everything, the noise, the density, the sense that the city was optimized for people 30 years younger than me, had started to feel like a constant low-grade friction I couldn't escape. My doctor told me my blood pressure was elevated and that I needed to reduce stress in a meaningful way, not just take a vacation, but genuinely restructure my daily life. My accountant, a careful and thorough man named Howard Briggs, who had managed my finances for 11 years, told me my portfolio was stable and that I had enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, provided I did not make any large and reckless decisions. My son Keith, who lives in Roseville with his wife and 2 kids, told me not to go. He said it in that measured way he has, choosing each word carefully, like a man who knows the argument is probably already lost but feels obligated to make it anyway. He said I didn't know anyone there, didn't know the culture, didn't speak the language, and that moving to Southeast Asia at 69 without a clear plan was the kind of decision that looked adventurous from the outside and looked different once you were in the middle of it. I told him I understood his concerns and that I was going anyway. I have always done better when I am moving than when I am standing still. That has been true my entire adult life, and it was still true at 69. I found an apartment in Makati within the first 10 days, a clean building in a decent part of the city, reasonable monthly rent, English spoken in every store and restaurant and building lobby within walking distance. I liked Manila more quickly than I had expected to. I liked the food, which was cheap and good and available at all hours. I liked that people on the street were generally warm and unhurried in a way that felt like the opposite of Sacramento. I liked that nobody there knew who I was or what I had been, that I was simply a retired American man who had chosen to spend his remaining years somewhere warm and unfamiliar, and that this was common enough in that part of the world that nobody thought much of it. Within about 3 months of arriving, I met a woman named Patricia through a social gathering organized by an expatriate group I had started attending on Thursday evenings. Patricia was 52, a widow who ran a small catering operation out of her home kitchen, a warm and practical woman who had no interest in drama and a clear-eyed view of the world that I found immediately comfortable. We began spending time together. She introduced me to her friends, brought me to family gatherings on weekends, helped me understand things about Filipino culture and family dynamics, and the unspoken rules of social interaction that I would have spent years getting wrong on my own. I was not in love with Patricia, and I do not think she was in love with me. But we were good company for each other, and we both understood the difference between that and something more, which made the arrangement honest and therefore easy. It was through Patricia that I first encountered the idea of starting a small business in Manila. She knew people in various trades and industries, and through conversations with her contacts, I began to see that there was genuine opportunity in import trading, small consumer goods, hardware, cleaning and maintenance supplies, the kind of items that were always in demand and moved consistently through both retail and commercial channels. I had done something similar in Sacramento in the mid-90s, importing hardware components from manufacturers in Taiwan and distributing them to contractors and hardware retailers across Northern California. I had made good money doing it, and I had understood the mechanics of it well. The scale here would be smaller and the margins different, but the fundamental logic was the same. I started doing research. I started having conversations with suppliers. I started thinking seriously about registering a company. Patricia brought Candace Navaro into my life at a dinner in BGC about 5 months after I had arrived in Manila. There were 4 of us at the table that evening: me, Patricia, Patricia's cousin Mylene, and Candace. Candace was 38 years old, dressed neatly and without excess, spoke English with almost no accent, and carried herself with a quality I had always associated with genuinely competent people, a kind of quiet self-assurance that does not need to announce itself. She told me she had spent 7 years in operations management at a mid-sized logistics company in Makati before going independent, and that she was looking for the right opportunity to apply that experience in a more entrepreneurial setting. I was not hiring that evening. I was not even actively looking yet, but I was listening carefully, because something about the way she spoke about operations, the specific language she used, the problems she identified, and the solutions she had applied told me she knew what she was talking about at a practical level, not just a theoretical one. I filed the conversation away. Over the following 3 weeks, Patricia spoke about Candace several more times. She said Candace was reliable, detail-oriented, and had helped a friend of hers organize a small import business 2 years earlier with strong results. I did my own checking. I contacted 2 people Candace had listed as professional references and had direct phone conversations with both of them. I asked around in the expatriate community I was slowly becoming part of. Nobody had a negative word to say about her. I made inquiries about her previous employer through a contact who worked in the logistics industry and got back a broadly positive response. I was thorough, or I believed I was being thorough, and everything I found supported what I had seen across the dinner table that first evening. I offered her the position of business manager for the trading company I was in the process of registering. I offered her a monthly salary of 60,000 pesos, which was a generous figure by local market standards, and told her there would be performance bonuses tied to the company hitting revenue targets I would define. She accepted without attempting to negotiate, which I interpreted at the time as a sign of confidence and professionalism. I have since considered whether it meant something else, that she had already calculated she would find other ways to supplement what I was paying her. But I did not think that then. Then, I simply thought I had hired well. In the first year, Candace was everything I had needed her to be. She handled the business registration paperwork with the government agencies, found us a warehouse space in Valenzuela at a rate below what I had budgeted, negotiated initial contracts with 3 suppliers, and set up our accounting software and filing systems. She hired 2 warehouse workers, men named Bernardo and Joel, who showed up every morning and did their jobs without complaint, and brought in a part-time bookkeeper named Perla to manage the day-to-day transaction records. She sent me weekly operational reports that were clean and clearly organized. She was responsive to my questions, sometimes answering within minutes of my sending a message. When I raised concerns or asked her to explain a decision she had made, she addressed my questions directly and without defensiveness, which was a quality I valued highly in anyone working for me. By the 6-month mark, the business was generating a consistent profit. Nothing spectacular. We were a small operation with modest volume but steady and real, and the trajectory was pointing in the right direction. I was pleased. I told Keith things were going well during our regular calls, and he said he was glad to hear it and I could tell from the careful way he said it that he was reserving judgment but willing to give the situation time. My relationship with Patricia ended peacefully around the 14-month mark. She had met someone she had genuine feelings for, a man her age from her home province who was returning to Makati for work, and she told me honestly and without drama. I respected her for it. We stayed on warm terms and still saw each other occasionally in group settings. The business I kept running. Candace, I kept. By that point, removing Candace from the operation would have meant rebuilding much of what she had established from scratch. She knew every supplier relationship, every account, every operational detail. The warehouse ran smoothly under her management. Our on-time delivery rate to clients was high. Our inventory losses were negligible. I had no logical reason to change anything, and so I didn't. What changed more gradually, and in a way I didn't examine carefully enough at the time, was the texture of my relationship with Candace herself. When Patricia had still been in my life, Candace had maintained a professional distance, warm in manner, but appropriately boundaried, the way a good employee stays collegial without becoming familiar. After Patricia and I ended things, that distance began to close, without either of us formally deciding to close it. Candace started joining me for lunch once or twice a week. She began calling in the evenings with updates that could comfortably have waited until the next morning. She started sharing things about her personal life, her mother who lived in Pampanga and whose health had been declining, a younger brother she was helping put through college at a university in Quezon City, a long-term boyfriend she said she had recently separated from after years of accumulated disappointment. I listened. I engaged. I was living alone in a foreign city where my primary social connections had thinned significantly since Patricia had stepped back, and I made the mistake that lonely people often make. I stopped noticing the loneliness because someone was filling the space it had left. By the time we passed the 2-year mark of the business, I had stopped thinking of Candace as an employee in any meaningful functional sense. I thought of her as a trusted partner. I told myself this was earned. She had performed consistently. The business was healthy. She had never given me a concrete reason to doubt her. What I did not examine honestly enough was the fact that my trust in her had become self-reinforcing. I trusted her, so I stopped verifying. I stopped verifying, so I never found anything to disturb the trust. And so the trust deepened, not because it was being continuously tested and confirmed, but because I had simply stopped testing it. Comfort had replaced vigilance. That is the most honest way I can describe what happened inside my own thinking, and it is not a comfortable thing to admit about myself. It was Candace who first raised the idea of expansion, and she raised it the way she raised everything, with preparation, documentation, and the appearance of careful thinking. She came to a meeting at the office with a written proposal, market research she had compiled herself, and projected revenue figures with underlying assumptions clearly stated. She told me there was a second warehouse available in Bulacan at a monthly rate we could absorb comfortably given our current margins, and that if we expanded our product categories to include basic electrical components and lighting supplies, we could target a segment of small construction contractors and property developers who were underserved by the existing distributors in that area. She showed me comparable businesses that had expanded into that segment and the revenue uplift they had achieved. She had spoken informally with 2 potential clients who had indicated genuine interest in placing orders if we could supply what they needed. The initial investment, she said, would be approximately 3.5 million pesos, and she projected recovery within 8 to 10 months based on conservative volume assumptions. I reviewed the proposal over 2 separate meetings, asked her detailed questions about the assumptions behind the revenue projections and the terms of the warehouse lease, and received answers that were specific and credible. I approved the expansion. I transferred the funds from my California account into the business operating account. I told her to proceed and to keep me updated as things developed. Over the months that followed, Candace sent me regular updates on the Bulacan facility. Photographs of the warehouse interior at various stages of setup, shelving being installed, inventory arriving in pallets, the space being organized into sections by product category. Inventory reports showing what had been purchased, what was in stock, and what had already been allocated to initial client orders. Revenue figures showing a meaningful uptick in overall business performance, which I attributed to the expansion beginning to deliver what she had projected. I visited the Bulacan location 4 times over those months. Candace was always present for those visits, always had documentation ready, always had explanations for whatever I asked about. The facility looked operational. The workers on site seemed to know what they were doing. I came away from each visit without any specific concern that I could name or point to. I should have visited more often. I should have visited unannounced. I should have cross-referenced what I was seeing on those visits against the inventory records in a way that I could have verified independently. I did not do those things, and the reason I did not is the same reason I had stopped doing many of the things a careful business owner should do. I trusted Candace, and trust, when it has become comfortable, feels like permission to stop looking. The call that broke everything open came from Howard Briggs in California on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. I remember the afternoon. Clearly the light was flat and gray. I had been sitting on my balcony reading, and when I saw Howard's name on my phone screen, I answered, expecting a routine quarterly check-in. His tone told me immediately that it was not routine. He asked me, directly and carefully, whether I had recently opened an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I told him I had not opened any such account. He said he was looking at documentation suggesting that an account registered in my name had been used to route a wire transfer of approximately $12,000 to a secondary financial instrument he could not fully identify through normal channels. He said he had been reviewing some of my financial paperwork as part of a broader annual review and had noticed discrepancies that he had not been able to explain to his own satisfaction, and that the offshore account discovery had prompted him to call me directly rather than wait. He told me to have the Philippine business accounts reviewed by a completely independent party as soon as I could arrange it. He said it clearly and without alarm, the way an experienced professional delivers bad news factually and without escalation, letting the facts do the work. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I put my phone face down on the table and sat very still for a long time, listening to the traffic from the street below. I did not call Candace. I did not go to the office. I did not send any message that might indicate what I had just learned or what I was considering doing about it. Instead, I made a series of quiet phone calls over the next 48 hours. Through a British expatriate I knew named Philip, who had been living in Manila for 15 years and had navigated more than one difficult business situation during that time, I was connected to a Filipino CPA firm that specialized in forensic accounting work for foreign-owned businesses. I contacted them directly and engaged them without going through anyone connected to my company. I told them I needed a full, independent audit of the company's accounts and financial records going back 24 months, and that for reasons I could not fully explain, yet it was essential that no one inside the company be informed that the review was taking place. I asked how quickly they could work. They said 3 weeks at minimum for an operation of my company's size and complexity. I said I understood and asked them to begin immediately. I paid their engagement fee by wire transfer from my California personal account. Then I waited, and I did not sleep well for any of the 23 nights that followed. The report they delivered was thorough, methodical, and devastating. The second warehouse in Bulacan did not exist. The facility I had visited 4 times, the shelving and the inventory and the workers I had seen, none of it had been ours. What Candace had done was arrange short-term access to an operational warehouse owned by an unrelated business through what the forensic accountants described as an informal arrangement with someone she knew, for the sole purpose of creating a physical location she could take me to on the 4 occasions when I visited. The photographs she had been sending me regularly were taken during those same visits and during additional photographic sessions she had arranged at the same facility without me present, building a visual record of a warehouse we had never leased or owned. The electrical components and lighting supplies she had purchased using the expansion funds I had transferred were real purchases. She had actually acquired the inventory, but she had immediately resold it through informal channels for cash, and that cash had gone into accounts she controlled and that had no connection to the company's official banking structure. The profit reports she had been sending me for the previous 14 months had been systematically fabricated using a secondary set of accounting records maintained in parallel with the official books. The part-time bookkeeper, Perla, the woman Candace herself had hired at the start of the business, had been complicit in maintaining both sets of records and had been compensated separately by Candace for this work from the embezzled funds. The fake offshore account that Howard had found had been set up in my name using documentation that the forensic accountants believed had been assembled from copies of my identity documents that I had provided to Candace for legitimate business registration purposes at the start of our partnership. The total amount embezzled across all identified channels, net of the real operational revenues the Valenzuela warehouse had legitimately generated, was $520,000. I read that figure in the written report 3 times before I put the report down and walked to the window and looked out at the street for a long time without seeing it. I called Rodrigo Castro the same afternoon I received the report. He was a Filipino attorney who had been recommended to me by Howard Briggs through a professional contact, a man I had met once at a business event but with whom I had fortunately stayed in loose touch since then. Rodrigo reviewed the forensic report the following morning and came back to me within the day. He told me the evidentiary basis for a legal case was strong forged signatures, fabricated documentation, traceable wire transfers, a parallel accounting system with a paper trail. He said criminal prosecution was a realistic option and that civil recovery proceedings should be initiated simultaneously. He also told me something that I needed to hear plainly, and that he delivered without softening, that in his extensive experience with cases of this nature, the probability of recovering the majority of the embezzled funds through legal proceedings was low. By the time these cases reached enforcement stage, the money was typically long gone, distributed and spent and laundered through networks that were difficult to trace completely. He said we should pursue it fully and that some recovery was possible, but that I needed to go into the process without expecting the legal system to make me financially whole again. I told him I understood. I asked him to proceed. The confrontation took place in Rodrigo's office 2 weeks later. Candace arrived with her own attorney, which meant she had known or strongly suspected that this meeting was coming. She had been preparing. She walked into the conference room and sat down across from me, and I looked at her face for the first time since I had learned what she had done, and I did not find there what I thought I might find: not guilt, not fear, not any visible sign of the years of deception that sat between us like a physical object in the center of the table. She looked the way she had always looked in professional settings: composed, attentive, and ready. The lawyers spoke first, laying out the findings and the legal positions. When it became clear through the course of that exchange that denial was not a viable path, Candace began to speak in her own voice. She spoke calmly and without visible distress. She said that she had done what she had done because she had felt chronically undercompensated for the actual value of her contribution to the business. She said that she had been the operational engine of everything we built, that she had managed the supplier relationships and solved the logistical problems and handled the daily complexity of running a business in a market I did not fully understand, while I had sat at a comfortable distance and received the financial benefits. She said that a 50% share of the profits would have represented fair compensation, and that since that was never offered, she had taken what she believed she had rightfully earned. She delivered all of this without apology and without self-pity, in the same measured, professional tone she had used in every business meeting we had ever had. She looked at me directly once, and she said, "You were never going to give me what I was worth." And then she looked away, and that was the last time she addressed me personally in that room. I did not respond. I sat with that statement, and I did not find a useful response to it, not because she had made an argument I could not counter, but because the architecture of her justification, the sheer assurance of it, the complete absence of acknowledgement that what she had described was theft, had removed my capacity for a productive reply. She had stolen $520,000 from me, and had framed it in her own mind as a compensation negotiation conducted without my knowledge or consent. The meeting ended without agreement. Legal proceedings were formally initiated. Rodrigo identified some assets connected to Candace, a vehicle registered in her name, and a residential property in Pampanga that had been purchased in her mother's name within the period of the embezzlement that could be subject to civil recovery proceedings. He told me the process would likely take several years to move through the Philippine court system and that my participation could be managed largely remotely once the initial filings were complete. I spent 3 more weeks in Manila after that meeting, moving through the practical necessities of closing down what remained of the business. The Valenzuela warehouse had several months left on its lease and contained equipment and inventory that still held value. I worked with Rodrigo's office to manage the asset liquidation properly. In the end, after legal costs and the sale of remaining assets, I recovered approximately $40,000 from the wind down, a small fraction of what had been taken, but something rather than nothing. Bernardo and Joel, the 2 warehouse workers who had come in every day and done their jobs with complete honesty throughout all of this, I paid 3 months of additional severance each. My lawyer did not recommend this as a legal obligation, and it was not. But those 2 men had nothing to do with what Candace had done and everything to do with what the business had genuinely been, and I was not willing to let them walk away from the situation having been the most honest people in it and having nothing to show for it. I flew back to Sacramento on a cold Thursday morning in February. Keith picked me up from the airport, and we drove mostly in silence, which was the right choice from him. He had said what he needed to say before I left, and there was no version of saying it again that would have been helpful. His wife had made dinner. We sat at the table and I answered their questions carefully and honestly, and I held myself together, because I had decided on the plane that whatever I felt about what had happened was mine to process privately and on my own schedule, not on display at my son's dinner table. I had made that decision, and I kept it. I want to be honest about what $520,000 means at 71. It does not ruin me. I want to say that clearly because the truth matters here, and I have no interest in performing devastation for its own sake. I still have my pension, my Social Security income, and savings that were held in separate personal accounts that Candace never had access to. I will not be unable to pay my rent or my medical bills. But the money that is gone was money I had specifically set aside for the final chapter of my life, for healthcare costs that tend to increase as a man ages, for anything Keith might need unexpectedly, for the small comforts and insurances that make getting old something other than a process of systematic reduction. That is a real loss. It is a permanent loss. And I knew when I boarded that plane that I would spend the remaining years of my life managing around the shape of that loss, rather than with the cushion I had built specifically so that I would not have to. Rodrigo has sent me updates periodically since I returned. The civil recovery process has moved slowly, as he predicted it would. As of the last substantive update I received, approximately 42,000 additional US dollars had been recovered through asset proceedings after legal fees were deducted. That is almost certainly near the ceiling of what the legal process will deliver. I have accepted that, not easily and not all at once, but fully enough that I can say it without the tightness in my chest that it produced for the first many months. What I spend more time with than the legal outcome is the reconstruction, the going back through events and looking for the moments where I had the opportunity to see what was happening and chose, consciously or not to look too closely. And when I am honest in that reconstruction, the answer is uncomfortable. There were things I could have done differently that had nothing to do with extraordinary vigilance or professional paranoia. I should have engaged an independent accountant from the beginning, someone who reported directly to me and had no connection to anyone inside the operation, to review the books quarterly. I should have visited both facilities on an unannounced basis at regular intervals, not just when Candace knew I was coming and could prepare for my arrival. I should have required that any major financial decision above a certain threshold require my direct authorization through a process that did not run entirely through Candace herself. These are not complicated safeguards. They are standard practice for any business owner who is not personally present in the day-to-day operation. I did not implement them because doing so would have implied a degree of distrust towards someone I had decided to trust, and I did not want to have that feeling. That is the honest reason. I had made a decision about Candace, and I did not want to second-guess it, because second-guessing it would have disrupted a comfort that I had built around her presence in my professional life. And so I didn't. And that decision, made quietly and without drama, every time I chose not to look more carefully, cost me $520,000 over 2 years. Candace Navaro believed she deserved more than I was paying her. That claim is not something I can evaluate with perfect fairness from where I stand now, because I was not inside her calculations and I did not have access to her actual contribution in the way she experienced it. What I can say is that if she genuinely believed she was undercompensated, she had options available to her that she did not choose. She could have made that case to me directly. She could have negotiated for a profit-sharing arrangement. She could have walked away and found a position or a business that would pay her what she felt she was worth. She chose none of those things. She chose to steal systematically over 2 years, to build an elaborate infrastructure of deception to conceal that theft, to forge my name on documents, and to use my trust as both the access point and the camouflage. Whatever her grievance was, that was what she chose to do with it. I can understand a grievance. I cannot understand the choice, and I have stopped trying to. I am 71 years old. I live in a smaller apartment in Sacramento than the one I had in Manila, and it is familiar in a way that I had not realized I missed until I came back to it. Keith visits on weekends. My blood pressure is lower than it was when I left California, which my doctor finds encouraging. I am not bitter about the Philippines. I want to be clear about that, because bitterness would be the wrong conclusion to draw from everything that happened. The Philippines did not do this to me. A specific person, making specific choices over an extended period of time, did this to me. The country and the people I encountered there, who were honest and warm and genuine, and there were many of them, deserved nothing from me but the same fair memory I would give any place I had lived. What I would say to any man, considering something similar, a retirement abroad, a business in a foreign country, a trusted local partner with strong credentials and warm recommendations, is this: do not let comfort replace vigilance. Do not give a single person authority over the financial infrastructure of your business without a parallel and independent system of verification that reports directly to you. Do not interpret the absence of visible warning signs as confirmation that none exist, and understand that the most dangerous moment in any professional relationship is the moment when the person you are working with has become, in your own mind, indispensable. That feeling of indispensability is sometimes genuine competence and deserved trust, and sometimes it is the product of a situation that has been very carefully arranged to feel that way. I am a cautionary story now. I am aware of that. I have made peace with it in the way that a man makes peace with the things that cannot be changed, not by pretending they do not matter, but by letting them matter fully, and then finding a way to carry them without letting them define everything that comes after. The man who flew back to Sacramento in February was more awake than the man who had flown to Manila 3 years earlier, more honest about his own limitations, more clear-eyed about the difference between trust and verification and why both of them are necessary. That is not nothing. At 71 years old, with what remains of the years I have, it is worth something to know the things I know now, even at the price I paid to learn them. It has to be worth something. I have decided that it is.